then he will repay all according to their conduct. The gospel of the Lord.
Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
I'm a bit embarrassed about my TV habits. About a year ago, my nephews got me hooked on MMA, or ultimate fighting, mixed martial arts fighting. It's brutal. It really is. I mean, I think I probably somehow transfer my aggression through that violence. It's really over the top. I'm embarrassed to say that I get into that and I kind of watch those that ring. Well, anyways, I got kind of drawn into it, and I would, text my nephews back and forth about the different matches that were on television and the like. But I got to know one of the fighters, not in person, but began to read about him. His name is Cody. And Cody comes from a family of fighters. Can you imagine growing up in a family of fighters? And everything in his life surrounds this MMA, this ultimate fighting. And he really is an incredible athlete, an incredible fighter. But he's only about this tall. I mean, he's really short. You think you could take him? Really small. But everything in his life is focused on the success of being the toughest person in the ring. He even admits that he is proud of the hurt that he can heap on his opponent for being just kind of a small guy. Everything in his life is defined by ultimate fighting and about destroying his opponent, and by getting championships for ultimate fighting. His life is defined by those things. And also outside the ring, he brings that kind of fighting lifestyle. He'll be the first to admit that he is a big partier. Recreational drugs and, everything that goes with that kind of high lifestyle. He's even addicted to ink, tattooing. I never knew that you could get addicted to such a thing. He also admits that he has objectified others and not really thinking about relationship, but just about using people. He parties hard. He fights hard. Everything in his life is defined by toughness. That's how he sees himself, as tough and just really hard and difficult. You think with all the success, things would be just perfect in his life. But Cody just recently admitted that he has felt a bit lost in his life. He has often told people in interviews, I feel like something is missing. I have everything. I'm the best fighter in the world, the ultimate fighter in the world. But something is just not quite right. I struggle with what he called emptiness. Maybe that's something we all struggle with a bit. That sense of emptiness. Well, sadly, for Cody, this became unbearable, this emptiness, this sense of loss, this feeling that something was missing. It got to such a point that he decided to try to kill himself, hang himself. And you're probably aware that suicide is one of the biggest social issues confronting us, especially among young people. And for Cody, as he stood on this chair with a rope around his neck, draped over, tied to a beam in his ceiling, just as he was ready to jump off to snap his neck, his brother came in at that exact same moment. It's almost miraculous. And his brother caught Cody just before the rope could snap his neck. Held him in his arms. Saved his very life. That story deeply moved me. And of course, he went off to treatment, started recovery. I went to a witness talk where he spoke of this event in his life, and he said the one thing that truly brought him further into his treatment and his recovery was here. He started to come to church, to Mass. And Cody proudly and with strength now can say, soon he discovered that he wasn't so lost by coming here. He began to see what was missing in his life, especially community, relationships. He soon began to lay down his life to cast off those things he thought were important and what he thought defined his life. He ended his witness talk by saying the thing that he was missing so much in his life, his very self. He said he discovered it in God. He discovered it in God. In many ways, I think that is the heart of today's gospel that we hear. And we hear Jesus tell us and say to us in today's gospel, whoever wishes to save their life will lose it. And whoever loses their life for my sake, they will find it. They will find their life. And honestly, to lose your life, I think it's a really difficult task to do. Have you ever tried to lose anything on purpose? Intentionally? Well, it's next to impossible. So what is Jesus asking when he says, lose yourself? Well, Jesus is inviting us to lay down, to cast off, to let go of what is false, what is not true, what is not you. In so many ways, it's casting off fake news, but especially as it pertains to you, to us. To find our authenticity in no less than God, in God's divine being, in Jesus, who is the icon of humanity. Today's gospel, I think, goes to that realization that losing yourself is a realization that we need to cast off those labels that society and maybe even ourselves, that we place upon ourselves. You know, priest, bishop, CEO, lawyer, whatever it might be. We're not our jobs. We're so much more. We are not even our depression. We are not our sadness. We're not even that last shameful mistake that we made in the past. Yes, we might feel those things very deeply and they hurt. But they do not define you. They do not define us. We are so much more than those labels and events that we define ourselves by. And that indeed, that when we discover our very selves in God, in God's very life and being, we come to see that our DNA is really God. We're part of God's life. And that we've been lavishly anointed with the oil of salvation and gladness. First and foremost, we are a child of God. That is who we really are. Magnificent in holiness and sacredness, our very lives. And I say all this because when we come to know ourselves in this God, when we come to know who we truly are, our truest selves, we find ourselves in a God of strength. We are strengthened by our identity in this divine presence, in this divine God, in this Jesus. And this strength will enable us, as our gospel today tells us, to take up our cross and to follow, to be that disciple. But we find that strength in finding ourselves in this God of strength and power and wonder. It's interesting, in much of the Latin American theology, the word cross can also mean struggle. Just think of how we are struggling as a community in the face of systemic racism. As we deal and combat those things that are an affront to the very sanctity of life, assault weapons, the lack of freedom, the way we label others. If the cross is a struggle, then that means our cross is probably seated right next to us. And the only way to come forth from a struggle, to live out of a struggle, is by bringing together all of us, that we all carry each other's cross, the struggle to greater freedom. And celebrate that God in which we discover our truest selves, the very wonder of who we are. We discover our truest selves, sons and daughters of God.